Hey everyone, this is Dominic from Tonebase, and I'm so excited today to be talking about a topic that's really passionate to myself and also our special guest, David Chang. This is the topic of mental practice, why it matters, and why we really live this. It's not something that's abstract or sort of theoretical. This is practical. This is something that really impacts our day to day lives, our performing careers, and more. So I'm super excited that you guys are excited about this topic. We've got a great audience today. Please feel free to ask your questions. We'll be getting to those toward the end of the stream. There's a lot of things to talk about. Use that blue ask button to ask your questions so that I can quickly get to them because I absolutely love how busy our chat gets, and I'm going to be looking forward to finding your guys' questions right off the bat. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring David onto the screen right now. Hey, David, thanks so much for joining us again. For any of you that have not met David yet, he's attended a few of our real life events on Tonebase. That's where I first met him in New York City. He's coming to us from New York City, and he also was a part of a really popular and awesome live stream. What was it? Back in April, the end of April, on his logical notation system. So I encourage you guys to check that out if you already haven't. So welcome, David, and looking forward to
Thanks
talking
again for
with you.
having me, Dom. I really appreciate you having me here. Pleasure to
Absolutely.
be here.
Absolutely. No, it's all our pleasure. I thought today we could kick things off with kind of talking about mental practice in a very relatable sense and talking about our first experiences with this. You and I have had some good conversations around it, and I thought we could share a little bit about how we, came about this realization that what goes on in our brain is just as important as what's going on in the fingers. And maybe I'll start and then turn things over to you in just a minute. So for me, mental practice was something that really occurred to me in my teenage years. I was about 14 years old and I was about to play Rachmaninoff Etude, Opus 39, number 9, a beautiful, exciting work. And it begins with a series of D octaves, right? But I remember sitting in the audience and thinking, okay, I'm looking forward to playing, and what's the first note? And I was thinking that in my head, and I realized I didn't know what the first note was. And spoiler alert, that's why I always bring my scores with me to any concert, just in case. We have handy phones and iPads now, but just always good to have your score around, just in case. But regardless, that was a pretty, scary experience for me. I remember getting on stage and somehow letting my muscle memory find the note for me and performing and getting through things. But it was semi traumatizing to not remember what the first note was, and I realized that there was something going on in the brain that I wasn't activating properly. And this is something that kind of was on my mind for a number of years, eventually culminating when I went to college, and that would have been a few years after. Uh, in at the Manhattan School of Music in the conservatory, I realized that I really needed to figure out this little thing that had been bugging me for years. Like, why is my brain not as engaged as my muscle memory, as my muscles, and how can I try to alleviate that? So, in my experiments, I actually tried to learn a piece purely from mental energy. I tried to learn Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto just from the score. We always hear about stories like this, right? Where, oh, this pianist learned a score on a train, or they learned it on an airplane, or etc.
Yeah.
Needless to say, this was a failure on my part as well. I tried to learn Rock 2 from just the
Well,
score.
you picked a difficult piece
Exactly,
to to do
exactly.
first.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
something that we'll talk about in a second about, when you get
Yeah.
started in this practice, how to actually get started. Maybe don't go to the tippy top of the repertoire. What I realized very quickly was that mental practice was something that I had to nurture and cultivate just as I would my fingers and more. So I realized that I had to maybe not start with Rock 2, but maybe start with something like a Bach prelude or a Bach musette or something, and go from there. And that truly there is a connection, a fascinating connection between the muscles, the mind, and the body. So, needless to say, as I wrap up this short little anecdote, mental practice became essential for me, and we'll be talking about ways today that I really did cultivate this, how David's cultivated it, and
Mhm.
how it's not necessarily a magic bullet that just fixes problems instantly. How it's a necessary thing to really work on and more. So that's my brief anecdote about mental practice, and I'd be really curious, David, for you to share your first experiences with this idea and how it went for you.
Sure, absolutely. So I'd love to share kind of my first serious foray into this. And I think as I near the end of that story, I also talk a little bit about what I think are some superpowers that you gain as a result of doing mental practice well, maybe how it applies to everybody, because we would love everybody to leave with actionable steps that you can actually literally use. I know sometimes we hear, oh, it's a good idea to do it. Everybody agrees it's a good idea. It's kind of talked about very generally. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. So I kind of dabbled a little bit, didn't have as dramatic a story as the Rachmaninoff pieces that you just talked about earlier on, but I actually went to Disney World with my family as an adult, I think around 2014, 2015. And that time I'm a pretty obsessive practicer as I've been many times in my life. And it was the first time I was away from a piano for a long time. And so, of course, I brought all of my scores along in a huge backpack. And by the way, of course, we happen to be pianists, but this can apply to really any and all instrumentalists and maybe singers as well too. And so, anyway, so we got to Disney World, and I wondered how many people in the world were studying their scores while waiting in line for roller coasters and things. But there's a point where your family, everybody else is on phones, and there's times when we're chatting and having real family life and everything. We don't want to take away from that, but other points where people are just killing time. It's like might as well try to practice some of my pieces. And I'm mainly playing from memory, checking the score for reference. And I found I was really good at some areas. In other areas, it was really much spottier. And like Dom, I found that some areas it was a lot more difficult in the beginning. I was playing Brahms Opus 118, the whole set of six pieces. I was playing virtuosic etudes, and I found some parts were easy, some parts were honestly a struggle. But what I did find is that after that week-long vacation or so, when I got back home, the my pieces were surprisingly quite a bit stronger in terms of memory than before I left, even though I'd gone about it in a very haphazard sort of way, and I hadn't done it in any sort of formalized way. And I wanted to improve it. And at that time, I mean, there weren't really nearly as many online resources as 10 years later, but still, I tried reading a lot. I looked all over in terms of piano pedagogy, articles, books, resources, old things, new things. I didn't really find anything that for me was specific or strategic enough that I was able to really understand how can I improve the skill of mental practice itself. But I was very intrigued by how on just one family vacation away from the instrument, my memory had improved a whole bunch. And so some of you saw my logical notation live stream, and I think it's just called The Power of Logical Notation and Fast Musical Progress. Maybe I could just share
Mm-hmm.
briefly so people can get just like a brief sense of what it looks like. And it's very related to mental practice as well, too. So here's good old River Flows in You, and there are examples of playing quarters of a measure plus the next note, both hands, examples of playing an eighth of a measure plus the next note, both hands, or half of a measure plus the next note, or vertical, separate hands. And this was a notation that I developed, and some of you may have seen that in another tone-based live stream. Other people might know me from somewhere else. But what many people don't know is that I originally developed it for mental practice. And it was because I couldn't picture, for instance, all of Brahms' Opus 118, number two, but I was able to picture smaller sections. And so just like physical practice, I had to ask myself, what can I start from? What can I picture effectively? And for me, it might be two measures or four measures or even half a measure of a really difficult section. For a student, it might be even a quarter of a measure or an eighth of a measure. And it could be just one hand alone, but most people will find that they can picture three or four notes without too much difficulty. And that's where we can start. And so there's a way to mentally practice little tiny chunks, even separate hands. and then through spacing come back, expand them into larger sections, transition into both hands. And we might get into that like a little bit later during this stream. So that was originally for mental practice, and then it turned around and applied even more to physical practice as well too. So the two are very, very interrelated. And like I promised earlier, in terms of the superpowers that you gain from being able to do mental practice, I don't know if for Dominic this was surprising or not, but basically, if you can do mental practice well, you really can start from anywhere in the music that you're imagining from memory. Really, any conceivable point, pretty much. I mean, oftentimes it's easier to start on beats, but it's something that, for me at least, is beyond even theoretical analysis. Practicing separate hands, I mean, all these things are great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on music theory or traditional elements either. But theory is still approximate to the extent of like a dominant seventh chord. It could be different voicings, there could be different distributions. What fingering are you using? What sound? What type of alignment of your arms and everything? And so to me, mental practice is akin to conscious awareness. It's like psychically knowing what is next. And so after I'd cultivated this skill, it was shocking to discover like anywhere that I was thinking, I could actually start from there from memory. So that's one superpower. Another one is obviously being able to practice wherever you are, when you're traveling, when you're at the office, when you're away from the piano. And so it's much more versatile. It's much more fun. It can be a lot healthier, and you can get in greater quantities and qualities of practice because your practice is more varied. For pianists, people that sit for too long, it's you can have a healthier lifestyle and everything. And so it's hard to overstate really the abilities that you can gain from doing mental practice well. So I don't know if that's been your experience as
Oh,
well too, Dom.
absolutely. I mean, I do find much more efficiency in applying this, and I think now actually we can actually get to the core of like sort of like what mental practice even really is, and and talk about like what that is for both of us. I mean, for me, in a very direct way, what I realized was if I can imagine, playing a C major scale in my head, and for me, when I'm mentally practicing, what I'm actually personally thinking about, and this is different for everybody, so it's not a one size fits all approach. Everyone has a different way of working through their music, but for me, it's point of view of the keyboard. If I close my eyes or imagine, I can see this spectral 88 keys. I can see my hands on them. I can see them playing things. I can sort of tactily feel the keys. I can be thinking about maybe the harmonies that I'm playing. And for me, the relationship between playing the piano and thinking about it is a very, very similar one. So it feels quite transferable when I go back and forth. And so when I was thinking about in my early college years, like I can easily imagine a C major scale, like in my head, how it feels, how it sounds, and more. Like I'm not gonna forget that because I just can easily remember that. Could I also extrapolate that to like Rock 3? And the answer is yes, you can. It takes some work. It takes some effort. It takes building, that up, that muscle, the brain, in the same way that we would build up our finger muscles. But absolutely, you can. And one of the things that I find really valuable, as a quick tip to you guys to try at home, is if you're trying to get started and you just don't know, how to go about this. Um, Always start with a piece that you've got some kind of muscle memory with. In other words, like don't do what I did, which was pick up a piece of music you've never touched before and try to like practice it. It's always better to at least have got your fingers in it, feel it around, be able to maybe play through it with the music. Maybe you can play it muscle memory, from memory. And then let's start trying to apply this mental practice to it away from the piano. So, what you can do is you can go away from the piano, you can grab your score, you can look at the first line, and you can look at it, imagine yourself playing it, put the score down, try to imagine it without the score, pull up the score, look down again, go back and forth, and see how it goes for you. Maybe it's easy, maybe it's hard. If it's hard, you can literally practice it over and over again in your head. If you do that 100 times, it's probably going to get a lot easier. And then when you go to the piano, test yourself. See if that actually makes the experience easier. probably my hypothesis is that yes, it will be a little bit easier for you to play the instrument now. You can practice in your head slowly, fast, and more. One of the things that I sometimes equate this to is running through your lines. It's almost like an actor or a poem that you're remembering all the words, right? And at first, when you have a poem in front of you, you're trying to remember the line and then the next line, and maybe you have little memory devices like, the hen goes to the chicken coop, it goes to the farm, and all these different ways to remember your words. But eventually, instead of taking 10 minutes to like run through that poem, maybe you can run through it really fast in 5 minutes, or maybe even 1 minute. You can quickly just go through your lines, and that's kind of how music can be for yourself. Like take again, maybe take something like a concerto. Might take me initially an hour and a half to imagine through it, but then by the time that I'm about to perform it, I could do that in 20 minutes and quickly zoom through it and all the different details. And so that's just a quick little tip for you guys to think about. Um, but David, why don't you talk to us a little bit about like what is your like actual mental practice look like for you inside your head?
Well, we've had some conversations around this. I think I could easily go on too long about it. The short version is that there are many commonalities with the way that you do it, but I don't, ironically, I don't picture visual things well in a traditional way. And I don't know if anybody out there can relate to this. I've talked with many different students and clients, and some people are more like Dom. Maybe they picture and it's just, maybe it's just the piano keyboard. It's super, super visual. I can't really picture people's faces. I can't really picture like really concrete physical things. I guess people, but I recognize people. It's not like I know some people maybe they can't recognize people at all. Or maybe sometimes it's a little harder the first few times I meet somebody, but so that's not really, but I'm not able to picture like normal physical things in a normal way. Um, and so you might think that I wouldn't be able to do mental practice as a result. The test is like, how do you know if mental practice is working? One of the ways is if you're imagining a given passage or a given piece, like I was saying earlier, can you go over to the piano and start from almost anywhere that you're imagining? And I found that I can. So whatever information that is, I do have it because I'm able to realize it physically. I think it can be summed up as my sense of hearing is extremely refined. My sense of touch is extremely refined. So and not touch like the feel of the wood or, against my keys. When I think about it, it's like the three-dimensionality of the keyboard, all those exact distances, the intervals, including accounting for all different black and white keys and distributions. I remember those very, very specifically. It's cultivated a lot through eyes closed practice and awareness and so on. And it's like my sense of touch informs my sense of sight. So I think it's a little more abstract than what Dom is describing, but those areas of the keyboard that I need in order to mentally see properly are kind of lit up in the dark. So when I've reflected on it, that seems to be the case. So for instance, like when we're physically playing at the keyboard, we actually, as pianists, we don't actually need to stare at our hands the entire time. There are plenty of times when we don't actually need to, look at our hands. It's equally easy to play away from the keyboard. Whatever visual cues I actually need to physically play accurately, I can see those very clearly and they're informed by my sense of touch. Other times it might be that visually it's more abstract and it's more my sense of touch that I'm imagining. So I share this because if any of you have thought like, oh, I've kind of wanted to do mental practice, but I don't know if I'm good at even picturing like normal things, you definitely can do it. And I am proof of that. So
Yeah, that's a
just
great
thought
point.
I'd share that.
And actually, I want to just quickly point out something you said that was very interesting, David, which is that, again,
Mm,
a lot of us don't always look 100% of the time at our hands, whether we're a guitarist, violinist, pianist. Anytime that you're not looking at your hands, you're doing some version of visualization. Like even if you're looking at just the score, right? And you're looking at your score, you're not looking at your hands. Um, there's some there's some little amount of visualization that you're doing that allows your hands to like know where to go, even if it's not quite in the same way as like a fully away from the instrument type of practice. So I do want to stress
Mhm.
that. And again, as another activation point for some people, if you want to try another stepping stone, play 4 bars of music at your instrument and immediately try to imagine right after you play it. That can sometimes also really help you like feel and sense things in a slightly different way. So I definitely want to encourage that. If either play at your instrument, then visualize those 4 bars, or get the score in front of you, read it, visualize the 4 bars, and basically try those as different activation points. And what I would encourage you
Yeah.
guys to do is try it for like a week. Try to do it 5-10 minutes a day. See what kind of progress you get. See what if there's any interesting findings that you're having, positive or negative. The one thing that I do want to mention is that mental practice in this way of using your brain can be very tiring. Like, this is not like easy stuff to do. I and I'm sure David as well. I personally
Hmm.
value this kind of work, 1-to-1 ratio to actually being at the instrument. Um, if I'm doing 1 hour of mental practice, I value that equally to 1 hour at the piano. I also understand that, frankly, 1 hour of mental practice can be much more tiring than 1 hour at the piano, because my brain is having to sort of recreate everything in its own little mind, region, rather than the fingers just going about their merry way. And it's interesting
Yeah.
because there's been other people that I've spoken to about this. One pianist, Nicholas Namaradze, who told me that sometimes when he's like visualizing music for like 6 hours, his arms will start getting a little tired, and he's not even used them. But the mental energy, and there's some kind of kinetic neural pathways between the muscles and the brain. There's little activations, and 6 hours is a long time, I would say, but there's some kind
No,
of
yeah.
connection in that way. So it's definitely something, some food for thought on that regard. But
Yeah.
David, you have some other interesting ways of how to sort of activate some
Oh, yeah.
practice, whether it's some singing internally, or more. Do you want to talk about
Yeah.
a tip or two that you have?
Yeah, I've got a bunch, and actually, I know we've talked a little bit before we went live, and frankly, we have too many things to share in this one stream. So, I'll just say, just speaking to what you were saying a moment ago, I definitely value mental practice, like in terms of it being equally valuable compared to physical practice. When I track my practice time, I count it as every bit as important. I really don't even track them separately. And maybe it'd be interesting in a little bit to speak to like what are the different ways that you use mental practice in your daily life or regular life, Dom. But
Mm.
I have this video on YouTube called like how I relearned a piano sonata using mental practice or purely using mental practice, where I traveled for a month in Asia last year, spent 2 weeks in Japan, and I played a Norman Delajoyle Sonata number three. It's a great sonata. I think it's about 15 minutes or so. Didn't remember it before I left, as I played it years ago, and I kind of used my own logical notation and system, and then I was able to relearn it. So I was able to play it in full once I got to my destination, which was Shanghai, where my in-laws are. So, so that clearly was a situation where it was very worthwhile to use it. We're able to maintain huge numbers of pieces away from the piano as well too. So that's just to give you guys like a literal example of like why is it that we may value it just as much. And Dom's told me some very interesting stories also about how he's been able to maintain pieces to a very, very high quality, even for performance and everything too. So anyway, so just wanted to speak to that in terms of why I value it so highly. And as for becoming in the beginning, it's very tiring, or it can be very tiring. So I definitely agree. It's great to start with small little segments and so on. I've found that it's not very tiring for me now. It can be certain types. I do a lot of different types of mental practice work, both with sheet music and without. So with sheet music is, you can do that in a coffee shop, you can do it at the airport, on public transportation. You can, go to the park and anywhere that you have the score. I am willing to be a big weirdo about it. Like I will literally, I'll have sheet music out like in a clothing store or like while I'm standing in line for something. I don't care. Like, so if you're willing to be that much of an oddball, you can do that there too. But then the other type of mental practice that I'll do is the type that doesn't involve the score. So one example of where I really don't have the sheet music out is if I'm doing cardio. So if I'm, running or walking, like if you're not doing any kind of like unusual motions with your hands, cardio is a great time to do mental practice as well too. Um, so if I'm doing lots of detailed mental practice work with the sheet music, that can be more tiring depending on what it is. But other times, if you cultivate the skill, I mean, just like physical practice, we learn technique and we learn better ways of going about it, and then we don't get as physically fatigued. I actually think the same can be true of mental practice. When you practice the skill and you start to get used to mentally picturing in certain ways in certain contexts, I think you won't get mentally fatigued as easily. It just takes some time to cultivate that skill. So hope that makes some sense.
Absolutely. I mean, that's
Yeah.
great advice. And the other thing that I would say again is that just to go to another access point for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
again, maybe it's too difficult initially to just like get right into your piece, the notes, the chords, and everything. But one thing that a person could do, which again is a version of mental practice, is to say, okay, like there's five major key centers in my piece. What are those five centers? And just make sure that they snap into your mind. It's C major, goes to G major, goes to D major, goes to G, back to C. And it's like, okay, like that, even that unto itself, which is it's just another entryway to using your brain to really empower your body, your fingers, and more. And so for me, that's something I recommend to people
Yeah.
that might also be looking for another access point is thinking about mental practice, not just about the notes, but structurally. If you're in sonata form,
Sure.
you should know the key centers of the exposition, the secondary theme, the development, and the recap. Just simply that's always super helpful for us. Um, and then, for me, as well, from personal experience, sometimes, a lot of times, I'm on the road traveling for performances, and people always say, oh, but like, you don't have a piano, you must be so stressed out, this and that. And frankly, I'm not, because for me, because of the way that I use mental practice and more, no matter where I sit down, whatever instrument it is, I just kind of go into my mental, little place and just allow myself to flow through that state, and the other external things don't matter as much. So for a lot of pianists, entering that mental zone, that mind palace, which is a cliche term, but is applicable, like that's the kind of thing that professionals do to be able to overcome external factors and odds. I mean, I saw Marc-Andre Hamelin play Beethoven 4, the Fourth Concerto, in April. Amazing opening, but there was actually a hearing aid that was out of control in the hall. Very loud,
Oh.
very, very noisy. So, for anyone that knows, that opening is very delicate. But they decided to perform this first movement with this noisy thing. But I saw, in real time, Hamlin just activating this, whatever he does, getting into the zone.
Mhm.
And afterwards, I spoke to him and he said, oh, yeah, I didn't hear anything from the audience because I'm just so trained on just hearing the
Yeah.
music, and that's it. And the thing is, what I want to stress for you guys as well is, for me, the superpower, one of the superpowers for me with mental practice is something that I like to call perceptual slowing, and this comes down to what sometimes people talk about, like baseball. How do you see like
Mhm.
100 mile an hour pitch coming your way and hit that? Like how does a person do that? And while I'm certainly not a baseball player, what I understand is that through years of work, practice, and more mental strategy, visualization, etc., the brain and the body are able to process information, simply put, at a higher superhuman speed, and able to connect different, again, neural pathways that the normal person really can't. So for me, again, kind of the equivalent of being able to recite a poem in a quick stream of consciousness, or seeing Rachmaninoff concerto just in a flash, seeing all the different things pop up. That's how I can really slow things down and actually be able to execute them in a very, very unique way. And just very briefly, I want to share with you guys my process and how I actually apply mental practice to the music that I play. Very at the very beginning, what I do is I put fingering in. I always start from there, make sure that I've got a good blueprint. And that's a whole nother topic, which we'll see if we get into today or not. But putting fingering in is super important. So
Yep.
I really have decided what the plan is. After that, I actually immediately start memorizing from muscle memory, actually. I start trying to get through my piece through understanding the harmony, just the muscle memory and more. And then at a certain point, I'm able to play through my piece from memory, but it doesn't stop there. When I can play through my piece from memory in the practice room, I don't trust it yet. I then start applying mental practice to going through the piece from memory. And quickly I'll realize the spots that actually are a little not secure, that I can't clearly picture and more. And that's how I really put the icing on the cake to enter into this like new zone of realization of the piece, I would say. So it always kind of steps through that process for me, and I think everyone's got a different procedure that works for them. But again, I do realize that for me, muscle memory is not something I discount, and I don't want us to throw that out the window. It is very important. And I know I saw in the chat earlier about choosing the right fingering for C major and making a decision, and I think that's really what's critical. If you're trying to imagine something and you're flip-flopping fingering, you're kind of getting confused
Mhm.
about which hand goes where, you have not decided yet what your plan is there. And that's a critical juncture where you might make a mistake in your performance, and that's something to really, really sort out. And a lot of times
Yeah.
when imagining it, that's what's going to really jump off the page at you. So, but David, I'll turn it back
Yeah,
over to
great.
you.
Oh yeah,
Uh, you
sure.
know, uh, what are some other tips that come to
Oh
mind
yeah,
for you?
I was wondering if I could take a risk here, and because I know we're going to open it up to Q&A
Yeah,
soon. So we wrote over like a dozen tips here, and I was thinking to just uh, I might reference other things, give incomplete, simplistic explanations, but I think it'll open up more questions. I think all of them are very actionable, and some of them are things you already said. I'll expand upon them, and then if there's more questions that they can, everybody that's watching can reference other things, or we might talk about it in the future. So I'll just go through rapid fire and kind of see. Hopefully, somebody will get something from this. So one thing is gradually taking away your senses at the instrument itself. Without going into too much detail, if you can play a given passage physically, so you're able to play, let's say, these 16 or 12 measures or whatever it may be, now try playing it silently on the surface of the keys. Now you might get lost at first, but now let's assume you get to the point where you can do it. So you're playing your piece or passage silently on the surface of the keys. Ideally, you should be able to physically start playing whenever because you've kept track of where you are. So this is already one type of mental practice or one variation. You've taken away sound and part of the touch. If you can do that, then you can try playing your piece in the air or in your lap. You might look at the keyboard or at your instrument or not. And then you might also be able to transition physically into literally playing and realizing it in reality whenever. That's a really great test of even more removed from physical practice. And then, of course, then there's what I call pure mental practice, which is imagining even your fingers moving. If you search on YouTube, like strongest memory technique for pianists, I made a video where I just demonstrate that with Fear Release. That's one thing. Second thing is basically what you just said, planning out fingering. And fingering basically, like even physically at the piano, if we use five different fingerings, it's going to really confuse your muscle memory. First of all, your body becomes confused about which one that you mean. It's like shooting a basketball with five different forms instead of just practicing one. And so away from the piano, I like to, I'm the crazy person that writes 100% of the fingering, which I can go into. Dom writes a lot of fingering for what I can gather. And so if you write a lot of fingering, if you're away from the piano, if even if you practice the last eighth of a measure, you practice separate hands, you start from a spot you've never started from before, you'll keep that consistency of fingering in your imagination, which is very important for memory. Number three, starting with a small amount of mental practice each day. We kind of already talked about that. So basically, you want to start with a small amount so you don't become too mentally taxed. And I would say apart from the getting easily mentally tired, right? So that's a really good reason to start with small amounts. It's also a great way to cultivate great habits. So if you're not working out regularly, just do one push-up a day, do 1 minute of cardio a day. Humans are terrible at starting and activating things. So just try doing a tiny little bit of mental practice. Um, Fourth thing, and this is kind of related to the previous point, but you may want to start small and simple horizontally and vertically. So if you're a pianist or somebody that's playing more than one clef, like you probably want to start with separate hands. And I'm gonna go even more extreme than what Dom said. If you know, you can do four measures, you can do one measure, you can do 1/8 of one measure, you can do 1/16 of one measure. I bet that you can probably picture like two notes, maybe, or three notes. Because mental practice is also you look at the score, you're like, oh, that's an E, and then you go over to the piano and you play an E, and you haven't forgotten it between the time you looked at the score and the time that you played it. That's also mental practice to some extent. So start with really, really small things that you can picture and be willing to go down as small as necessary. And if you have trouble picturing visual things, then it might be that you're tapping on a tabletop or you're doing something else that involves at least one of your senses. Um, the fifth thing, cultivating mixed physical and mental practice. This is along the lines of what Dom had said earlier, where you're maybe imagining some away from the piano. I think you could do it even more rapid fire at the piano as well, too. You can play 1/8 of a measure at the piano physically and then immediately imagine it. Maybe right hand alone, and then left hand, you can play just this and then imagine that. Very simple way. I just call it mixed practice. Number six, using spaced repetition. So I think in brief, it's just this idea of, maybe when you do something 100 times, like Dom was saying, maybe don't do it all in a row, because we all know if you do something physically 100 times all in a row, it might not be quite as valuable as spacing out those 100 times and coming back to it over spaced intervals. Every time that we have to spend that effort of retrieval, that cognitive effort, it'll enter the long-term memory more. There's that illusion of knowing in the learning research. It seems like we know it better when really we don't. And then the opposite, it seems like we don't really know it as well, we're struggling, but really it's helping our long-term memory. And so if things seem fuzzy, if you're trying to picture a quarter of a measure and it seems kind of fuzzy, how about picturing eighths or sixteenths of a measure that you can picture clearly, moving on from it, coming back the next day. And the second or third try, you may find that magically those eighths of a measure, because you had to retrieve them, they're sticking a little bit better, such that you can now picture a quarter of a measure. So you can start to piece together clearer and clearer mental fragments over time. Um, let's see, these can be really quick. Number seven, do more eyes closed practice. It'll really help your sense of distance. Very general, could expand on a lot more, but won't right now. Number eight, you could sing a lot more literally and or internally. It doesn't need to, it sometimes can be intimidating when we hear the comment, sing and conduct through your whole piece. Like, what if I'm not singing well? What if I don't know a conducting pattern? It doesn't matter. What's more important, if somebody asks you, how does your piece go? Can you even hum it? Can you describe how it goes? If not, it's very difficult to picture the oral part of it, the hearing part of it accurately. Uh, and then super briefly, number nine, listen to recordings of your piece if there are any. That could help a lot. You could imagine other senses as you're doing that. Number 10, you could do tabletop practice. Anything, if I played like clarinet and saxophone back in the day too. I mean, you can like do this, type of thing. If you're away from the instrument, that could really help. And then these other ones, if you want to look at my logical notation live stream, the power of logical notation and fast musical progress, it's on tonebase. It's on my YouTube channel as well too. I guess that could be number 11. The thing is, every single thing that I say there, make it apply to mental practice instead of physical practice. For separate hands, I use 2 angle brackets. And for both hands, I use 1 set of angle brackets. And if that doesn't make any sense, then watch the live stream. It's like everything that applies to physical practice can and should apply to mental practice as well, which is kind of the next point. So you treat it just as specifically, or you can. And then I think these last 1 or 2 or 3, it's a piano and mental practice thing. I think it's also a life thing. Just start trying it. Start incorporating in your regular life. Take very small actions. And so, when you're waiting in line, just try doing a little bit of it. You have only to gain if you're by trying little experiments, and just be very messy and imperfect about it. Feel like you don't know what you're doing, and just try it anyway. mess up, use the notation wrong, and I found that my willingness to be imperfect is part of what's been enabled me to cultivate this skill all this time.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's the very brief,
Oh, beautiful. No.
very quick version. So,
Well, thanks a lot, David.
yeah,
I'm sure with those
yeah,
those 14 tips and actually more, we could do a whole whole lecture
yeah.
about that. But absolutely, everyone, I definitely encourage you to try it. And again, one of the things that all the pros recommend is if you're going to do mental practice on something, start with the opening. When you are about to perform, the last thing you want to kind of think about is the opening of your piece. That's always a great general advice to do, so that your mind hopefully maybe stops racing. You can sort of try to control some of those nerves. We can't always. I get it. We get nervous and stuff happens. But at least trying to really get into that mental zone where you imagine the opening, you go to play, get off to a good start. That's always going to be possibility for success after to follow. But I do want to take a look now. We got some questions. So let's get into
Cool.
these questions now. So let's see here. Gail has a question. Dominic and David, when you are playing from memory, do you see the entire score in your mind as you're playing? This is a common question. So maybe we can clarify that again. So I think Gail means like, do we see like the sheet music
Yeah.
in our minds? David, do you want to answer that?
Well, it seems, at least for me, and it seems like for you too, Dom, it's not actually the score. It's really the piano keyboard itself or the equivalent on one's instrument. I mean, the score is very important, but to me, it's an intermediary. It is a thing that we then translate into whatever it is that we're doing at the keyboard. So it's what we're doing at the keyboard or at the instrument that I'm seeing. So it's like I'm aware of the present, but I'm also seeing a little bit into the future. So if you've ever asked yourself, like, oh, what's next? And it's scary that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if Dom and I ask ourselves what's next, I mean, if we've done it right, then we do know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I would say. Whatever that means, just actually knowing what is next, that's what it is that I see, at least, if I've done it well.
Exactly. So I would say that whatever instrument you play, when you're playing and what your eyes are seeing, whether it's, I guess it might be the score in front of you, but for most of us, it's maybe our hands, maybe it's,
Mm-hmm.
and this is all in relation to like memorization and more. That's exactly what I'm imagining. Like if I was a guitarist, what I'd be imagining is like looking at my right hand, looking at my left hand, and as a
Yeah.
pianist, I literally see my hands on the keys in my head and see them moving around, crisscrossing, and more. So for me, that's absolutely going to be the most translatable. That's why for me, mental practice and
Yep.
actually playing, it looks the same, it feels the same, and that's why
Mhm.
it's such like a one-to-one type of relationship for me. So again,
Yep.
I'm not a photographic memory person. I don't have photographic memory. I'm not imagining reading a score and sort of playing along to my memory.
Right.
Yeah. And when I'm at the piano playing, sometimes if I want to, I can see sort of the ghostly hand of where I need to be going next, and that's part of maybe
Yeah,
another
I see that
superpower.
too.
Yeah, yeah. So,
To me, it's just pure conscious awareness of
mm,
what is next.
yeah,
If I've done
absolutely.
it well, that's why I think it's the most elegant. That's why I think of it as the strongest memory tool. Everything else is just an approximation of like actually knowing what's next. Now, it's still possible for me to have a memory slip if my muscle memory fails, and also
Yeah,
maybe I didn't do mental practice of that part. But we try to reduce the mental practice reduces the chances of that happening quite a bit.
absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think most importantly, when I do this, this is not a recipe for ending memory slips. This is a recipe
Mhm.
for developing absolute confidence that no matter what happens, you're going to get back on track. And that's really, really critical to think about. And I've talked about this on tonebase in the past that developing confidence at your instrument is not about avoiding mistakes, but at being able to deal with them because they're going to come. We're human, and that's what makes us human. And just always having that confidence that like, oh yeah, like whatever happens, I'm okay. That's when you start actually not worrying as much, I would say. So yeah, that's again,
Yeah.
it's a really interesting factor. Judith has a comment about just a comment she wants to share. I try to picture parts of my piece just before you go to bed. Closing your eyes, checking the score before bed helps you a lot. The time of day makes a big difference, Judith. I know for me, morning time, I'm more awake. I like to do my memory work
Mhm.
in the morning. But yes, bedtime, the last thing you think about, that's a lot of studies show that that can be very valuable. Any thoughts on time of day for you, David?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that. I'm just do it at all different times so but I mean, for nighttime, and I love naps too. I might have said this in the first live stream. I mean, it's like memory consolidates during sleep. And so, you're strategically using a great time in terms of mental practice. I mean, I'll purposely like memorize and do more mental practice, not only before I go to sleep at night, but also before naps,
Mm-hmm.
randomly throughout the day as well too.
That's
And
great.
so, both mentally and physically, I think it's worth it if you take a more global approach to practice like little tiny sections, cover a wider area, and then go to sleep. And then all of them are consolidating during sleep. And then you're just, you can't fight biology to some extent.
Hmm.
So I think that's a great strategy, whether you're purposely using that as a strategy or not. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And Martha has a terrific question right here. If you
okay.
begin mental practice too early in the process of learning a piece, don't you risk practicing the wrong fingering? And the answer is yes,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
absolutely that's why fingering, and that's part of the learning process as a musician is getting better at fingering. And that's maybe a topic
Yes.
we'll save for another time, David, because it's an interesting one. Fingering,
Yeah,
but
it
Martha,
is.
this is actually my quick 2 cents is this is a lot of times my fingering that I choose is based on simplicity of memory. I usually pick fingering that's not overly complicated, so it's very easy to remember and therefore easier to execute. Fancy fingering is not my middle name. It's fingering that's going to be reliable, secure, and easy to remember. That's what I've learned for
Hmm.
myself is really valuable. So, absolutely, Martha, and that's part of life is realizing at some point, drat, like I have the wrong fingering for this, and I need to like relearn this. So that happens to all of us. But yeah, David, I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think about beginning the mental
Yeah.
practice too early?
Well, I'm a big fan of writing, in my case, all of the fingering. In your case, maybe like just a lot of the fingering. But yeah, that's like the first step for me. If it's a Baroque piece, there might be other things to decide, like ornamentation, articulation plan, etc. But what I will say is, if I have the complete fingering, I would, in theory, be able to put together the whole piece without the use of the piano at all. I usually choose not to because that's usually harder to do, and there's no reason to like completely avoid the instrument. But once I have all the fingering written out, then I avoid the problem that or the in the question that we were just asked. So yeah, so this way, if I have all of the fingering, I can stay absolutely consistent, even if I'm practicing fractions of a measure, even if I'm completely away from the piano. And we're still willing to adjust later on, just like if we were playing physically at the piano. But I would just say, just have it all written out first, or either all of it or a lot of it written out first. Um, I mean, what Don does that's really interesting and that I started doing as well too is writing more fingering away from the piano. Um, and that's a whole nother conversation. Originally, I was just writing out all the fingering at the instrument. So one way or another, have all or a lot of the fingering written out, and you'll avoid that issue,
Yep.
is the short answer.
Absolutely, and having a wonderful teacher to help guide you, make sure
Hmm.
that you are going down the right
That's true.
path
That's
is gonna.
true.
I mean, that's a huge deal. I mean, a lot of times with my students, I prefer to, before I have them super commit on tons of practice on a piece, I like to just make sure that the fingering, the blueprint is okay before they overdo or build the wrong habit of a
Yeah.
fingering, because we all know how difficult that is to erase and untangle is a wrong fingering.
Mhm.
And again, you ask like, how do I know if it's the wrong fingering? Experience, getting to know yourself, knowing what works for
Yeah.
your body, what doesn't. I could tell you everything that works for me because of intimate knowledge, and I'm sure David could certainly talk about what works for him, and that's different. What I prefer fingering, I'm sure, is a little different from everyone else on the planet, and that's part of growing as a musician, I would say.
I think this
Um,
simplified thought experiment's assuming that you have a good fingering when you're doing mental practice, because the whole topic of fingering is vast and
Yeah,
it's kind of a whole separate series of conversations.
it
So
really.
assuming you have the right fingering, these are some useful mental practice ideas. Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Fingering is something we'll talk
yeah,
about in a piano
yeah.
specific class at a later point.
Mhm.
But Gail has a question about do you break each piece into key landmarks before starting to learn it? I would say personally, I do both. Literally, key
Mhm.
signature landmarks for me, absolutely. So I know the key signature landmarks, but also absolutely, Gail. Like, if I was to look at a piece and you wanted me to talk about the different segments of the journey that I'm about to embark on, I would certainly be able to talk to you about those because I think David mentions being able to hop in
Mhm.
anywhere into a piece. That's really important. In addition, for me, I do have my comfort zones
Yeah.
I like to hop in. At the different train stations, so to speak, and those are ones that I certainly segment out. But yeah, David, do you also break your piece into sort of landmarks, or do you have it more as one stream of
I do it
consciousness?
in a number of different ways, but yeah, I think of with my students, I talk about like break the glass in case of emergency spots, like areas you can at least jump to and so on. I think that's almost like in terms of memory, that's one of the most rudimentary strategies. So at least you can start from somewhere. You can skip a section or start a section over again. So kind of have those as I piece together using my own logical methodology, the quarter or the eights into quarters, then halves, then ones, then twos, then fours, then eights or 12s or the rough equivalent. I have my own little notational system about how music groups into a lot of the time groups of four or their rough equivalent, and then into groups of eights or 12s or their rough equivalent, and then into larger sectional groupings that maybe are more along the lines of what you're talking about with different keys and so on. So yeah, so I'd say I think about it in all of those sorts of different ways
Hmm,
that I just described. Yeah.
wonderful. Randy has a question about is mental practice specifically for memorizing, or can it also be used for
Hmm.
voicing, phrasing? What do you think about that, David?
Wow, I like how you turn it over to me first. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it could be used to imagine anything. I think honestly, in terms of these tips and so on, I don't know about Dom. I was more thinking about, just literally the notes themselves,
Hmm.
not even talking but I think just the same as one uses mental practice for public speaking or baseball or whatever it is. I mean, it's only limited by your imagination. So certainly I'm imagining the phrasing and the sound and the tone and the technique of what it is that I'm playing. But I will say it's almost like a different part of my brain or focus than literally if I'm playing the notes. Like for example, like I don't imagine pedaling specifically very much. Like I'm not imagining how my foot is moving. And we've had some discussions around this before. Um, so I'd say like most of what I've talked about, at least, I'm talking about mostly playing the actual correct notes. I think the phrasing, tone quality, and everything, that's just kind of enclosed within my sound imagination. I don't know that I'm kind of specifically thinking about it beyond that. I don't know about what it is like for you, Dom,
Yeah.
if you're,
I mean,
yeah.
as a pianist, we're always dealing with completely different instruments and different spaces
Yes.
with different audience sizes and more. So for me, I try to keep my mental practice more open-ended. One of the things that I don't do is overly mentally practice phrasing or voicing per se because then it can be disconcerting when you sit down at an instrument and suddenly like you have a cognitive dissonance where like the voicing is totally different than what you've been imagining,
Mm.
and then that's a friction point. So,
I think we're similar there,
yeah,
probably.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
so more so about the notes, but one thing I would say, Randy, is that certainly when you're looking at the score and you are trying to see like where does a phrase go, where does leading my fingers into the pinky to get the voicing and more like those types of things are certainly gonna be beneficial. They're certainly not bad. They're good to do. I think David and myself both have a tendency to have a slightly more open-ended approach that leaves room for that phrasing and spontaneity. I would say in the moment, depending
Yeah.
piano to piano. But a great question.
I would say if you're less worried about the notes, that I mean, what it's like, I'm not worried about memory for the next few bars or something. I mean, that frees you up
Hmm.
to then play with beautiful voicing and phrasing,
Hmm.
etc., instead of going into survival mode.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I would say that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have time for just like one or two more questions. Taylor has a quick question, maybe a bit out there. Mental practice for polyrhythms. Any thoughts? Well, Taylor, certainly like when I'm playing, like I don't know, Chopin Nocturne 48 number one, lots of three against fours, two against threes. Certainly, I'm making sure that when I imagine those in my head and I'm playing through them, that the polyrhythms work. So polyrhythms, if they're in the piece, for sure, are a part
Yeah,
of practice. For really feeling them correctly is a big deal. So yeah, I mean,
yeah,
separate. Perhaps it could be helpful to be imagining, dun da da dum da dum, that kind of
yeah.
thing. But yeah, I mean, polyrhythms as part of the music is always going to be, I think, part of the mental practice.
I just treat mental practice that like all of the micro decisions I make in my physical practice. I mean, it's just as detailed with mental practice, and so polyrhythms are no exception.
Mhm.
I find when I'm teaching students like four against three polyrhythm, for instance, almost always the first half of the four against three polyrhythm isn't as good as the second half. And so it's like you could break things down very granularly, which I would recommend
Abs-
even within that. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, and yeah, I mean, I noticed there's a lot of chat in the so thanks everyone for joining in and sharing all your thoughts. Yeah, let's see here, like Richard on how you specifically mark fingering based on thumbs. Great idea. Hand positioning is always helpful. I know Susan is mentioning that she's 79 and memorization can be more difficult and more not easy but rewarding. Susan, I think we can all start from wherever we're at and try to apply some
Yeah.
things and try to forge forward. With hopefully some of these tips today. But yeah, I mean, it's great to see how everyone's responding to this, and the bottom line is again, mental work does take a lot of energy. So just keep that in mind, everyone. It's not
Hmm.
always super
But
easy.
it can take less energy over time.
Yeah, you get better.
It's
You get better.
you get better at it.
Oh yeah. No, for
Yeah.
me, the last thing I'll say is, every time I have a new piece that I'm trying to go through this process with, yeah, it's a little hard, and I get like, oh, I'm so tired, like trying to run through this thing. But then a week later, it's like, oh yeah, I can just like zoom through it, see all the corners and more. So it takes practice. I've been doing this work for a decade, if not 15 years at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely at a different level than I was back then, and I think everyone can just start today, tomorrow, and start building that benefit. Any last
Yeah.
words, David, before we part for today?
I think it's if you're asking yourself, is it worth the trouble? Because Dom's talked about his students kind of asking like, is it worth it? My students have asked if it's worth it. I mean, we feel it's been very worth it. It's the rewards are very difficult to overstate. But just like physical practice, it's like how long did it take you to get this good at playing your instrument physically? And are you willing to put in the work? And I invite you to try to put in the work. Just practice little fractions of a measure and just little bits of time. You will be amazed at what it can compound into over time.
Absolutely, absolutely. It all contributes. So thanks everyone for joining. We'll be talking more about this in the future for sure. So this is not the end of this conversation. I want to thank David so much for joining today. It's been really
Thank
great
you so
to.
much, Dom,
Oh,
for having me. Yeah,
it's
really,
my
really
pleasure
appreciate
as
it.
always. We got through a lot of stuff today. These are always archived. Feel free to watch them again at the same link you're at right now. And until next time, everyone, have a great rest of your week. And thanks again, David. Until next time.
Yeah. Thanks, Dom. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.